This happened just last year. My buddy Jimmy is pretty involved and well connected within the music community. By music community, I'm more specifically referring to the dance/electronic music scene all along the East Coast, predominantly New Jersey and New York. It's actually pretty impressive what he and his team have been able to accomplish in just 2 years. The general gist is this: their company hosts what they call events at high-profile venues, typically the most well-known club or party space in whatever city they happen to be in. Then they outsource the talent, which, mind you, is typically a very well-known and sometimes borderline famous DJ. I'm not too involved or invested in that scene, so I'm not exactly sure who they've gotten to perform, but I will tell you that there have been some huge names in the mix. But enough context. Jimmy and I go way back. I'm talking 20 plus years. I've basically known him my entire life, and he's been my best friend for damn near most of it. Because of that, he lets me, along with a bunch of our other hometown friends, come to his shows for free and hang out with the talent in the VIP section. It's actually really cool, and something I wish I expressed my gratitude for more often. Jimmy was scheduled to host a huge event the weekend of July 4th on the Jersey Shore. It was going to be their biggest one yet, and all our mutual friends were going. Jimmy invited me to come down early with him, and I obviously obliged. The two of us made the hour-and-a-half drive with our other friend Ryan, and we found ourselves at the venue a good 4 hours before the doors opened. Ryan and I didn't have much to do while Jimmy and his team set up, so we decided to get a bit of a head start on the alcohol consumption. Jimmy and his team were entitled to as much free booze as they desired, compliments of the venue, and Ryan and I definitely took advantage of that. By the time the first DJ started his set, Ryan and I were more than a little buzzed, to put it mildly. It was 4th of July weekend after all, so we felt like our degenerate activities were justified. Fast forward a couple hours and Ryan and I were completely wasted. I honestly don't remember a time since then when I was that drunk, not even close. Don't get me wrong, Ryan and I are grown men. We can handle our alcohol. Throwing up, making fools of ourselves wasn't the issue, though. It was genuinely just the problem of having lower impulse control and worse decision. But either way, we were having a great time, at least from what I can remember. The event was winding down, and it was getting to that point in the night where you either figured out how you were getting home or who you were going home with, or both. Jimmy had rented an Airbnb really close by and promised both Ryan and I a bed, so the first issue wasn't a concern. The second problem, though, that was what was on my mind. Two of us danced over to the bar and started talking to some girls we found attractive, and before long we had figured out who we were going to spend the rest of the night with. Neither of us are Calvin Klein models, but we're both above 6 foot tall. For whatever reason, the vast majority of guys who hang around the Jersey Shore are usually shorter than average, so being tall is an even bigger boost than it usually is, and for whatever reason that seems to be the main attribute most girls on the Jersey Shore seek out. Not looks, not build, not intelligence, but height. Don't ask me why. The Jersey and female mind is still something I have yet to comprehend. I'm probably botching their names, but I'm fairly sure the two girls introduced themselves as Gianna and Marcella. Us meeting them coincides with where my ability to recall events precisely becomes a bit hazy, so there may be gaps in the story from here on out. From what I can remember, it was actually Marcella who suggested we all leave together and continue to party elsewhere, which Ryan and I weren't going to argue with. Gianna handed the two of us a drink and insisted that we get on their level before heading out, even though we had both probably consumed the fluid equivalent of her body weight in alcohol already. I know that whole dynamic girls getting guys drinks sounds a little unorthodox, and it is, but these girls were clearly wealthy given how they were dressed. After downing the drinks, the four of us started moving towards the venue's exit. The moment we stepped outside, Marcella suggested we go back to her place, which was pretty close by and also right on the beach. Her saying that actually surprised me a little. I was fully anticipating going back to our Airbnb, considering the guys were usually the ones to host in situations like this, but both girls insisted that Marcella's beach house was definitely nicer than whatever inland Airbnb we found for the night. She had a point, so I didn't argue, and neither did Ryan. We walked along the beach talking the whole time. The girls seemed really intelligent and knowledgeable based on the conversations we had, and I remember finding it so refreshing to talk about something other than nightlife and whatever other garbage I'm used to talking to girls about, for once not just girls, drunk people in general. At one point I actually felt kind of embarrassed for being so drunk because I felt like I couldn't articulate myself well enough and looked like an idiot. That's when I realized I actually was feeling drunker than I had been 15 minutes earlier, but it wasn't a drunk I was used to feeling. I felt like my body was melting under my weight, as if I were going to collapse uncontrollably any second. My legs felt flimsy, almost like cardboard, if that makes any sense. Moving my limbs, mouth, and even my eyes became increasingly more difficult, and there was a moment where my extremities started feeling a little numb, but then just as quickly as the feeling arose, it passed back to normal drunkenness, at least for the time being. Just then we arrived at the beach house. It was insane. I'm probably exaggerating because I was so drunk, but it looked like what I imagined a professional athlete's beach house to look like. We went inside, and after taking our shoes off, found ourselves in what I'm guessing was a living room. I say guessing because the level of opulence in there was just so foreign to anything I'm used to. It was decorative but somehow minimalistic. Even those descriptions are opposite. There were honest-to-God sculptures on pedestals in there, but it didn't feel cluttered or overly showy, and everything on display seemed to blend right into the walls like they were just extensions of the room. I wish I had the wherewithal to take a picture, but again my mind was elsewhere. Evidently so was Ryan's, because not 15 minutes after stepping foot in the house, he and Marcella had disappeared somewhere in that maze of the house, which left me alone with Gianna. She leaned in to kiss me, and that's the last thing I remember before blacking out. Not her kissing me, but leaning in to kiss me. That's where everything cuts off. I don't remember feeling woozy again, or drinking more, or doing anything else, but there's a huge gap in my memory that spans several hours and will not come back no matter what I try. And the thing is, I know I didn't pass out because there are texts on my phone sent from me proving I was still conscious. There's digital proof that I was sentient, but I don't remember one bit of it. And before you say I just simply blacked out from alcohol, this was different. I rarely ever black out, but all the times I have, I can still remember bits and pieces of the night, scattered moments here and there, enough for me to string together a continuous sequence of events. At the very least, keep in mind those were also all times where I was drunker than I was that night, so that's another reason I think a generic blackout isn't a reasonable explanation for what happened. Plus, Ryan experienced the exact same thing at essentially the exact same time, which is way too specific to be coincidental. Here's the next thing. I remember waking up with the sun directly overhead, in a random set of bushes over an hour away from where the event was. Something I didn't know yet because my phone wasn't in my pocket. In fact, nothing was in my pocket at all. Both my wallet and keys were gone, but it gets worse. It wasn't even my pocket to begin with. I was wearing someone else's clothes, and not Ryan's either, a complete stranger's. The only personal belonging of mine I still had in my possession was my shoes, and even those were messed up. Both shoes had the shoelaces removed and were soaking wet. My head was pounding and everything felt disoriented, like I was waking up from anesthesia. I didn't even sit up right away. I just stared at the sky for a minute, trying to make sense of where I was. Bushes, someone else's clothes, no wallet, no phone, no keys. Based on my shoes, it was like I had been in the water recently, but I didn't smell like salt water or chlorine. The worst part about the whole thing was the blankness. I genuinely couldn't remember anything past Gianna leaving. Like I already said, that's when the panic started to creep in. I wasn't just hungover, I was scared. I had no idea how I got there. What if I'd gotten into a fight or crashed a car? What if someone drugged me? I didn't have a single point of reference for the last 10 hours. I stood up and realized there wasn't a single landmark around me. It didn't look like a beach town, which also scared me. The road ahead just curved into more trees, but just across the street, maybe a few hundred feet away, was a 7-Eleven. It was genuinely the only thing in sight, so I headed straight for it. I asked the guy behind the counter if I could use his phone, telling him that mine had been stolen. He stared at me for a second, probably debating whether or not I was trying to scam him, but then he slid it across the counter. The first number that came to my mind was my sister's. It was the only number besides my mom or dad's I still memorized, and there was no way in hell I was calling my parents. My sister picked up right away, and I tried explaining things the best I could. She ended up giving me Ryan's number, which I ended up calling several times, but to no avail. That's when I started wondering if what had happened to me happened to him too. Drugged, robbed, dumped in some random bushes an hour away. I was just about to call the police when, what do you know, Ryan walks into the same 7-Eleven. We just stared at each other for a second before dabbing each other up. He then told me his version of things, and you guessed it, it was the same story, damn near exactly. That sealed it for us. We called the police, making sure to thank the 7-Eleven worker profusely. Fast forward a few minutes, and we're now recounting our story to the police outside the store. To their credit, they took everything we said seriously at first, but the more we told them, the more their questions started turning. Were we sure we didn't just drink too much? Maybe we wandered off and passed out somewhere. They weren't accusing us outright, but it was clear they weren't entirely convinced something criminal happened. I told them it was unlikely we would have drunkenly wandered into a town an hour away by foot, and I don't think they liked that remark very much. I gave them my sister's number and asked them to call her. She was already tracking my phone through Find My iPhone. To all of our collective surprise, my phone was showing up in the middle of a parking lot a few minutes' drive away. The officers agreed to drive us, and sure enough, both our phones were sitting on the pavement next to each other. While it was great to have my phone back, that only affirmed the police's theory that we had just been drunk. They started saying that we probably hadn't even been robbed, that we had lost our wallets the same way we had lost our phones. We tried convincing the police to check out the house. Marcella brought us to the one she claimed was hers, but they weren't having it. They told us we were probably just too drunk and didn't remember things correctly. One of them even said, "Heps more than you think." Then they gave us their cards and told us to call if we remembered anything else. It was actually shocking how reluctant they were to even connect us to other officers that would be willing to help. They told us to find a ride home since our phones were still charged, and they just left us there After they left, I went through my phone for the first time and things got even weirder. There were texts sent from me to a ton of people I knew: Jimmy, my parents, a few coworkers, even some girls I had been talking to. All normal sounding stuff I might have said if I had actually had a calm, coherent night. The text genuinely sounded like me, but from a continuity standpoint, they didn't make any sense when considered altogether. One message to Jimmy thanked him for the events and said we'd crashed at a buddy's place once. My dad said we were safe and had found a couch to sleep on. There was another to a girl I'd been texting that just said something casual like I was hanging out at home and thinking about her. None of those texts made any sense and mostly contradicted each other. I realized I had a ton of missed calls and texts from Jimmy, so I called him. He sounded relieved to hear from me, saying he thought Ryan and I had died or something. He told us to stay put. He'd come pick us up. In the meantime, Ryan and I canceled all our cards, but interestingly none of them had been used despite the likely fact that they had been in those girls' possession for several hours. The entire ride home we talked nonstop about what could have happened. None of it made any sense. Yeah, we had been drugged, that much was clear, but that didn't explain things. First of all, I don't know of any kind of roofie that has those effects, like an induced blackout. Everything I've read just said those drugs make you fall asleep, but again I was conscious, as the texts confirm. Plus, why go to such lengths just to rob two random guys, especially if you weren't going to at least even attempt to use their credit cards? Two guys who walked up to you, no less, and in such a risky place. To your own house, or was it the house they had broken into? Both were equally risky. Jimmy thought we had been targeted, but like I just said, we had been the ones to approach the girls, so it was impossible for us to be the target. And it doesn't even address how or why we ended ourselves wearing other people's clothes in a strange town an hour away. As absurd as it may sound, Ryan and I looked for wounds on ourselves in case any of our organs had been removed, but we found none. Jimmy said that we might have merely been given some exotic drugs, which makes sense, but we were transported to that town by someone other than those girls, and they had changed our clothes with us. We never received a response, but it's not as if we simply forgot about it. In order to find that house, Ryan and I had to drive all the way back to the shore. Since the house was on the beach, we knew that if we just followed the boardwalk, we would eventually locate it, so we did our best to go back and find it. We both went up the walkway and pressed the doorbell. When an elderly guy asked us what we wanted when he opened the door, I did the speaking. I just asked him whether a girl named Marcella lived here or if he had a daughter or granddaughter about our age, not wanting to give away too much or maybe implicate myself. He flatly refused. And he thought it was humorous because I made up a narrative about a girl who lied about owning this house. I couldn't even characterize it as fear, but rather as a nauseating unease, as if something really terrible had occurred to me and my friend that night, and I would be lying if I claimed I didn't leave that house with that sensation. I'd never be able to find out what happened. For a long time after that, I was certain that those girls had been involved in something much larger than Ryan and I could have imagined. Perhaps they had been preparing to kidnap or kill us but changed their minds at the last minute for some reason. I'll never know, but if another thing occurs, of course, I'll send anything. I'm Ariel, and I reside in Georgia, close to the Alabama border. I drove to the small Alabama town a few summers ago to attend a 4th of July barbecue hosted by my college friend Isabel. It was one of the best nights I'd had in a long time, complete with paper plates, illicit fireworks, and way too much food. Good folks with lots of energy, children playing with sparkles, that sort of stuff, which, in retrospect, was probably my first error. I didn't depart until just after 10 o'clock. After the sun sets, that area of the state becomes quite quiet. It would take slightly more than 2 hours to go home, mostly on back roads, which were lengthy, deserted stretches of dim, 2-lane highways with dense tree lines on either side. I might occasionally come across a small church with a gravel lot or an old farmhouse, but otherwise it was just darkness. I had some music. I've always been a little afraid of the dark, so I'm sure that contributes to it a little bit. I was playing low and still felt okay about the party, but I'll admit that there was something about driving through locations like that at night that irritates me even when there's no actual reason to be. After about half an hour, I saw 2 headlights in my rearview mirror. It was a gray Nissan Altima, and at first I didn't give it much thought, thinking someone else had just jumped onto the same back road. However, the longer it remained there, the more I began to pay attention. Nothing out of the ordinary, but whenever we passed one of those overhead lights at a minor crossing, I could clearly see that the bottom half of the car looked like it had been driving through mud. That wasn't particularly strange on its own, but eventually I understood that no matter how much I sped up or decelerated, the car matched me precisely. I initially believed it might have been merely a coincidentally, I increased my speed by maybe 5 to 10 miles per hour, but the Altima did the same, so I tapped my brakes and allowed myself to go considerably below the limit. The distance between us remained the same. Now, keep in mind that on highways like that, people constantly pass one another. In most places, it's not even against the law. To make it clear that I was giving them the room they needed if they wanted to move about, I moved slightly to the right a few times. However, they chose to remain exactly where they were, around 6 or 7 car lengths back. I made the decision to test them at that point. I took the turn without hesitation because I wanted to get as far away from that car as possible, but 10 seconds later the car actually turned off and made the same left turn in the middle of nowhere. It was a random left turn coming up, and it looked like a small residential road with maybe 4 houses scattered on either side. The likelihood that they had a place on that road. I had a bad feeling in my stomach that I was actually in danger, and I knew for sure that they were following me at that point. It wasn't even up for argument anymore. I had no idea, but I most likely was. I'm not sure why, but the simplest connection I can think of is that I felt so powerless out there in the middle of nowhere, with no idea what that person wanted or why they were fixated on me. By that point, my heart was pounding through my chest like it would if someone had a gun to my head. However, none of the explanations I could come up with did anything but frighten me. All I wanted was to find a public, safe place with people and lighting. I heard that terrible sound that signals a nearly empty gas tank, like if I were on cue. Never in my life have I felt so helpless, I promise. My vehicle, a 2012 Corolla, is quite old and has experienced numerous issues. Occasionally, the gas light provides me 20 meters. Other times, I'm fortunate enough to obtain 10. A section of the state gas stations aren't precisely present everywhere. I took out my phone and searched for the closest 24-hour location. It was more than 8 miles away, and I wasn't sure if I would make it, but I had no other option. I had no intention of stopping. Not while that vehicle is still pursuing me. I considered phoning the police, but I felt that it would have been pointless to spend so much time in the middle of nowhere. It takes years for police officers to get anywhere. Additionally, I had the feeling that contacting the police would make the threats seem more real. I realize how illogical it sounds, and I'm embarrassed to even put it on paper, but I'm simply attempting to be as truthful as I can about how I felt. A few minutes later, the gas needle plummeted to empty, but it wasn't just low empty. I tried not to panic, but I could feel my emotions beginning to spiral. The car's every noise seems louder. The journey seemed longer, and I felt foolish for having so little control, but I was at a loss for what to do. I was aware that I would not reach the gas station. I began to visualize scenarios of what might occur if my automobile ran out of gas. To be fully honest with you, I nearly started crying when I finally saw the glow of the gas station sign up ahead. I took a sharp turn and pulled into the lot quickly to give myself time to get out of the car and book it inside. And I did just that. I leaped out and dashed inside, barely closing my car door as I went. Through the glass, I could see the Ultima from inside. I told the gas station guy what had happened, and he offered to call the police for me. It slowed to a stop at the edge of the lot and sat there for maybe 10 seconds with the engine still running. No one got out, though, as if the person inside was considering whether or not to pursue me further. Then, suddenly, it peeled off quickly and vanished back down the road we had come from. Despite speaking with it, I was still somewhat uneasy. There is no way to explain what happened to me that doesn't involve the person driving that automobile having evil intentions, even though I know it's not the scariest thing that can happen to someone. And I pray I never have to go through that sensation of overwhelming fear again. After arriving home, I vowed never to drive in the middle of the night on a rural back road again. However, the story doesn't stop there. A few weeks later, I experienced another stomach-dropping event. A segment about 2 men suspected of armed robbery, attempted murder, and other crimes in rural Alabama came on one evening while I was watching the news at home. It was just background noise, but they showed a blurry still from a security camera that stated that authorities thought the man had fled in a stolen gray Nissan Altima that was last seen going east. When I heard it, I simply stopped. I was aware of who had been pursuing me in my gut. I'm telling you that I sensed it, even though there was no way to confirm it was the same guy that followed me that evening. The location and timing coincided, and the cart's description was essentially the same. It all truly hit me when I told the police my account right away. My own foolishness could have saved the lives of 2 dangerous men. I will never forgive myself for not contacting the police sooner, and I think about it quite a bit. I never received a police update or heard anything about the incident on the news, but I will send an update if anything changes.